Tuesday morning. She sat behind the wheel of her car, parked on the edge of a correctional facility parking lot. The engine was off, the air cold enough that the windows had begun to fog slightly from her breath. On the passenger seat beside her, a clean change of clothes, a bag of trail mix, a pair of new sneakers still in the box. She'd been planning this for weeks, for years really. It had been 6 years since she last touched him, since they stood face to face under open sky. Every single week without fail, she had written him letters, long ones, carefully worded, updates about family, about the dog, her job, what she was cooking. Sometimes she'd slip in old photos, some of them printed at the pharmacy, others pulled from memory boxes and scrapbooks. Now, after everything, he was finally coming home. At 7:03 a.m., the doors to the prison opened. He stepped out without a sound, no bag, no smile. He looked thinner, harder. His head was lowered and his walk was slow but steady. She smiled and jumped out of the car, arms wide. The hug came quickly, but he didn't hug her back right away. He stood still as her arms wrapped around him. A second passed, then another. Then finally, his arms lifted, resting on her back, barely. 2 minutes passed before he said a single word. "Let's go." They drove off in silence. Not a word between them for 11 miles. The sun hadn't come up yet. Not really. The streets were still wet from an early drizzle, storefronts dark, houses asleep. At 7:16, they passed the gas station where they used to meet, back before his sentence. She glanced toward it and smiled again, a hopeful gesture. He didn't look. He just kept his eyes on the road. "Everything's changed," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, trying to figure out what he meant, but he was already turned away, staring out the window. He whispered something else. She couldn't make it out. She didn't ask him to repeat it. The home she brought him back to was small, lived in, a little worn around the edges, but clean, familiar. The same house they'd once shared, before everything went wrong. She had made the bed. She had cooked a meal she remembered he liked, lemon chicken and rice. She placed folded towels on the edge of the tub and lit a candle in the hallway just to warm the space. There were 2 glasses on the table and a small note with a heart on it, tucked under the fork. He walked from room to room quietly, without comment. He stopped to look at things. The living room, the chipped paint, the photo of them stuck with a magnet on the fridge. "Looks smaller," he muttered, staring at the hallway wall. "It's the same," she said softly. "No," he answered. "It's not." That evening, she called her sister and said something didn't feel right. "He's not the same," she told her. "It's like he's just watching everything, like he's not here. Not really." He didn't unpack his things. He didn't take off his shoes. He sat in the chair by the window for hours, watching the street. He didn't even touch the food. When it was time to sleep, he didn't come to bed. He said he needed space and stayed downstairs on the couch. She didn't argue. On day 2, she told a friend on the phone that he was quiet, but fine. "He's just adjusting," she said, though her voice cracked a little. "He's here. That's what matters." But her friend could hear the doubt behind the words. A long pause. Then, almost whispered, she added, "He's just different." By day 4, she was gone. No one saw her alive again after that morning. Not her friends, not her co-workers, not even her sister, who called and called with no answer. The only person who claimed to have seen her was him. He told police she left the house around noon for a walk, but her shoes were still by the front door. her phone still plugged in at the charger, the dinner she'd been prepping still untouched on the counter, and the bed she'd made so carefully still perfectly made. What happened in those 4 days has haunted her family, divided a town, and raised more questions than answers. And whatever happened between the moment she picked him up and the moment she vanished began right here, in this silence. The town she brought him home to wasn't large, just a cluster of quiet roads, single-story homes, and overgrown sidewalks. A place where people still nodded at each other across front lawns, where the grocery store clerk knew your favorite chips, where bad news always traveled fast, but good news traveled faster. That week, people noticed him. Some slowed down their cars when they passed the house. Others whispered over fences. He didn't wave. He didn't look up. He sat on the front porch with his arms crossed and his hood up, watching cars go by like he didn't recognize any of them. Neighbors would later say they felt off just walking by, that there was a heaviness on that property, something that hadn't been there before. Inside, the air was warm but still, the kind of silence you can hear pressing against your eardrums. She had tried to make it feel like home. Candles on the dining table, a framed photo of the two of them from before, back when they were younger, smiling, surrounded by people. Now, it was just the two of them, alone in a house that felt too full and too empty at the same time. The first night, the hallway light flickered. She'd just replaced the bulb the week before. It buzzed, hummed, and finally shut off altogether. He didn't seem to notice. The water in the upstairs bathroom ran twice that night, even though she hadn't gone up there. She assumed he was getting used to being in a house again. No more cement walls, no more controlled schedules. She gave him space. But space is strange. Sometimes it fills with things you don't expect. He began rearranging the couch cushions in odd ways, pulling them off the furniture, laying them in rows on the floor. She asked why. He didn't answer. He stood in the hallway for long stretches, hands at his sides, facing the wall, not moving. When she offered to make him lunch, he asked for nothing, just water. That night, he unplugged the microwave. He walked barefoot across the yard at midnight and stood at the edge of the fence line, facing the woods. Just stood there. She watched him through the window, unsure whether to speak or let it be. The next day, a neighbor texted her, "Is everything okay over there?" "He's been outside since 3 a.m. She replied, "Yeah, he's adjusting, just taking it slow." But even as she sent it, her hands trembled. The kitchen started to feel colder, even with the heat on. The hallway seemed darker. She left the bedroom door open at night. Something about closing it made her feel trapped. She found him once in the guest room closet, just standing there, eyes open, not saying a word. When she asked what he was doing, he stepped out like nothing had happened. She never brought it up again. She heard him talking in the middle of the night, not loudly, just low murmurs. At first she thought he was on the phone, but there was no phone in his hand, no light, no reply. The dog next door started barking every night around the same time. He said nothing about it. One afternoon, she tried to ask about their future, jobs, routines, getting help, readjusting. He stared out the window and said, "We don't need a plan. We're here now." She smiled, but the smile didn't stay. On the third night, she placed a bottle of wine on the table, poured them each a glass. He stared at it like he'd never seen it before. She said, "Do you remember our old kitchen?" He looked at her, paused, then said, "That wasn't real." She blinked. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "None of it was. Not really." The room went quiet again. That kind of quiet that stretches across your skin like a warning. Upstairs, the closet door had come unlatched. It swung open slowly, creaking against the silence. She went to check it. Nothing inside. Nothing moved. Still, she didn't close the door all the way. When she came back down, he was gone from the table. The wine glass untouched. The back door slightly ajar. She didn't sleep that night. Outside, the wind picked up. Something metallic clanged softly against the shed behind the house. She told herself it was the latch. It was always the latch. But by the time morning came, she wasn't sure if she was telling herself that just to keep from hearing what she thought she heard. Footsteps in the hallway that weren't hers. A voice whispering her name when no one else was awake. And the soft click of the microwave being plugged back in, even though she had left it unplugged herself. Day one was about adjustment. That's what she told herself. That's what she told everyone. The man she picked up that morning had spent over half a decade behind a gate. Of course, he'd be withdrawn, quiet, disconnected. He hadn't touched her much, barely said a word in the car. But he hadn't been violent, not angry, just off that first day she let it go. But it was day two that began to fracture what little peace they had. A neighbor noticed the back window of the house was cracked, not broken, just cracked in the corner. Like pressure had been applied carefully, almost surgically. Later, when police took photos, the crack had spread, spiderwebbing to the frame. But there was no forced entry, no sign of vandalism. The next morning, a local delivery driver reported something strange. A man matching his description stood at the edge of the driveway, not moving, just staring at the mailbox. When the driver asked if he needed help, the man looked away, walked into the woods, and disappeared. She never mentioned this to her sister, but in a voicemail around 3:40 that afternoon, she said something strange. "Don't freak out. Everything's fine. He's just acting different today, like he's watching me, like he's waiting for me to say the wrong thing." Her voice dropped to a whisper at the end of that sentence, almost like she didn't want someone nearby to hear it. The next morning, day 3, she was seen at a grocery store near the edge of town. Security camera footage shows her walking down aisle 6, picking out candles. Vanilla scented. She looked tired, distracted, but calm. That footage would later become the last known visual of her alive. She never got to light those candles. The receipt time-stamped her visit at 10:17 a.m. By 11:02 a.m., her phone pinged a cell tower 3 miles away, near a small public park. But according to the digital data pulled later, the phone never actually entered the park. It stopped moving near the parking lot, then abruptly went offline. When investigators tracked that timeline, something didn't fit. Her car was still parked in her driveway the whole time. She couldn't have made the trip to the store and back in the time recorded, unless someone else had gone in her place. She was never seen on the security cam returning home. Her phone was never turned back on. When officers arrived 4 days later, the candles were still in the grocery bag, untouched. That night, a 911 call was made from a blocked number, just heavy breathing on the other end. No voice, no background noise. The line stayed open for 17 seconds before the caller hung up. The call came from a location less than 300 feet from her house. Day 4 is where the accounts begin to splinter. He claimed she left the house on foot just after lunch, that she said she needed some space. No one saw her leave. Her shoes, both pairs, were still at the door. She had no jacket. Her wallet was still in her purse, zipped. Her phone still charging. A friend stopped by that afternoon. She knocked. No answer. She texted, "Are you okay? Car's here, but you're not answering." No reply. Later, that friend said she saw someone peering out from behind the curtain. She couldn't say for sure who it was, but the silhouette, she insisted, was too tall to be her. Investigators later found a half-written note on the kitchen counter, written in her handwriting, but it ended mid-sentence, and if anything happens, just tell them. That was it. The rest of the page was blank. In a chilling twist, officers found the microwave unplugged again, but the cord had been wrapped around it 3 times, almost tightly, deliberate. Police found laundry drying in the guest room, his clothes soaking wet, freshly washed. When they asked him why, he said he spilled something on himself. When asked what it was, he changed the answer 3 times. First, juice, then paint, finally. I don't remember. Her bedroom was neat, the bed made, her side still warm, her scent still in the air, but a single pillow was missing. To this day, it's never been found. A cab driver later reported picking up a man in a hoodie from a gas station on the far edge of town. Said the man smelled like bleach. He paid in cash and was dropped near a wooded area off the main highway. Police reviewed security cameras. The footage for that gas station just that day was corrupted. There's no record of that man arriving or leaving. A red truck was seen driving slowly past the house 3 nights in a row. A neighbor wrote down the plates. The number didn't match any registered vehicle in the state. The next night, the truck didn't return. Neither did she. A local woman came forward weeks later saying she remembered hearing muffled shouting from the house just before dawn on day 4. Said she heard a voice say, "Don't touch me." Then nothing. No follow-up, no yelling, no footsteps. Just silence. One thing stuck out in the autopsy report that followed. There were no clear signs of trauma, no stab wounds, no bullet wounds, no broken bones, but there were ligature marks, faint around the neck, consistent with pressure. Enough to stop breath, but not instant. Slow. She fought. That's what the examiner said, but quietly. There was blood on her hoodie. A small amount. DNA confirmed it wasn't hers, it was his. It was just after 4 a.m. when the first noise was reported. A neighbor, a nurse working night shift, said she heard shouting coming from the house next door. Not a fight, not screaming, just one voice raised, muffled, tense, controlled. Then something crashed, a sharp sound, like a table leg snapping or a lamp falling. She looked through her kitchen window but saw nothing. The lights in the house were on, but the curtains were drawn. She didn't call the police. At 4:17 a.m., a motion sensor camera on a neighbor's shed activated. It recorded just 11 seconds. A faint outline of a person moving across the backyard, barefoot, wearing a hoodie. They stopped at the tree line, looked back toward the house, then vanished. That was the last time anyone was seen on camera that morning. By 7:30 a.m. the sun had risen, but the house was still. Her car was parked in the same spot, curtains still drawn. No movement. At 9:42 a.m., a jogger found the body. It was off the main trail in a public park nearly 5 miles away. She was lying on her side, partially covered with a grey blanket. No shoes, no phone, no ID. Just her car keys clenched tightly in her hand. The scene was quiet, undisturbed, as if someone had placed her there gently, too gently. There were no drag marks, no footprints nearby, no obvious bruising or lacerations. Just the blanket and her keys. She was still warm. The initial assumption? Overdose. Until the autopsy ruled that out. Toxicology? Clear. No alcohol, no drugs, no sedatives, no natural cause of death either. What they did find were small marks on her neck, too faint to photograph clearly, but consistent with slow manual pressure, enough to stop airflow, just not all at once. It would have taken minutes. The medical examiner said it plainly. She did not go peacefully. But there was no sign of a struggle, no defensive wounds on her arms, no skin under her fingernails. She didn't fight back. Which begged the question, was she awake or was she already unconscious before it started? Back at the house, police found inconsistencies. The back door was locked, but the lock was reversed, set from the inside. The couch cushions had been stripped, the microwave still unplugged, and her phone left on the nightstand. No passcode. Battery at 4%. The last message she ever typed was still open on the screen. Are you still here? It was unsent. The man she had picked up from prison was gone. He disappeared sometime during the early hours of that same morning. His bag was missing. So were the shoes he'd arrived in. When police finally tracked him down 36 hours later, he was sitting in a public library 5 towns over, silent, calm, reading a magazine. He didn't run. He didn't argue. They brought him in, questioned him for 7 hours. He said she left him, that she was overwhelmed, that they had argued and she walked out. But when asked what she was wearing when she left, he paused, then said, "I don't remember." The cut on his hand, wrapped sloppily in gauze, matched blood found on the edge of her hoodie. He claimed he sliced it while cooking, but no knife in the house matched the profile. And there were no signs of food preparation that morning. Later, police uncovered a half-deleted text thread on his phone. Messages exchanged with another woman just days before his release. Some were intimate, others angry. One message stood out. "She thinks I'm coming back to her. I don't owe her anything." But no message was ever sent. When asked about the relationship, he denied knowing the woman, then admitted they'd talked a little, then asked for a lawyer. The family requested access to her journal. Pages from the days leading up to his release were filled with hopeful thoughts, excitement, nerves. But something shifted 2 days before her death. The entries became scattered, some lines scratched out, others unfinished. One final entry read, "He looks at me like he's trying to remember who I am." The court documents, later unsealed, revealed he had received therapy in prison, anger management, behavioral control. But halfway through his sentence, he had stopped attending sessions. One counselor wrote, "He shows no remorse. He knows how to smile through an interview, but the effect behind his eyes is vacant, like he's memorized the words but never understood them." In the days following the murder, a candlelight vigil was held outside her house. People brought flowers, pictures, cards. Her mother stood in the driveway, clutching the photo of her daughter at her high school graduation. "I told her not to go back," she whispered to reporters. I told her he wouldn't be the same. I didn't know how right I was. Everyone expected the case to be simple. A man gets released. Days later, the woman who waited for him is found dead. The evidence, though incomplete, seemed to point squarely in his direction, but it never led all the way to a conviction. And the longer the case stretched on, the more things didn't add up. Police had enough to detain him, but not enough to press formal charges. Not yet. Then something strange surfaced. A routine review of his post-release file showed a phone call made from within the prison after he had already been released. It came from the same inmate phone ID linked to his number. Timestamp 8:23 a.m. But he had walked out the doors at 7:03. So who made the call? The prison warden denied any irregularities, claimed it was likely a technical glitch. But a former guard came forward anonymously, claimed that the man, on the day of his release, had been taken aside for nearly 20 minutes. No paperwork, no witness, no record of what was discussed. When asked, the guard said only one thing. He wasn't supposed to leave that early. Meanwhile, her phone, left charging at the house, had one unsent message. That much we already knew. But when forensic techs dug deeper, they found a deleted audio recording. Less than 30 seconds. Bad quality. Mostly static. But one phrase came through. Please stop. It's unclear who the voice belonged to. It wasn't her voice, and it didn't sound like him either. Another twist came weeks later when DNA on her phone case returned a partial match. Not his, not hers, unknown male. No hits in the national database. Investigators admitted, quietly, that it might have belonged to someone else in the house that night, or someone who touched the device after the fact. But how? No forced entry, no broken doors, no prints. And then there was the neighbor's dog. According to statements, it barked every night for 3 nights in a row, always around 3 a.m. But on the night she died, it didn't bark at all, as if it recognized whoever was there. And maybe it did. Then, from within the walls of the prison he'd just left, another name emerged. An inmate who served time with him in the same block contacted reporters. He claimed that weeks before the release, the man had told him, "She thinks I'm coming home to love her, but I'm not coming home to love anybody." The inmate described him as calculated, said he wasn't loud, wasn't aggressive, just cold. Said he once watched him sit perfectly still during a lockdown while alarms blared and inmates shouted. Never blinked, never flinched. But what no one expected was the voicemail from her best friend. Left 2 days before she died. In it, she whispered, "He's not the one I'm scared of," is what they both said to me. They said not to tell anyone. They said it's too late. 2 voices, not one. But who was the second? A friend, a former inmate, someone who came back with him. Police never confirmed. Weeks passed, then months. Still no formal charges. Still no conviction. Her body was buried in a quiet ceremony, closed casket, small gathering. But at the gravesite, one person showed up uninvited. A man no one recognized. Middle-aged, wearing a black windbreaker and sunglasses. He never spoke. Stood in the back. Watched. Then left before anyone could approach him. His face didn't match any photos in the investigation. No one knew his name. And then there was the missing pillow. Still gone. Some believe it was used in the killing. Others say it was taken as a trophy. But there's a third theory. whispered among investigators off the record that it wasn't taken by the killer, that it was never in the house to begin with, that someone had been there before she died, someone neither of them expected. A third presence, a shadow unaccounted for, and that everything she feared in those final days wasn't just about him. It was about the things she couldn't say out loud, the things she only hinted at in half-written journal entries, the thing that vanished with her. A quiet room, her side of the bed still made, a pair of untouched shoes by the front door, the scent of vanilla candles, never burned, still sealed in their package. Her phone rests on the nightstand, screen dark, charger light blinking, final message unsent. Are those details evidence, or are they echoes? Throughout this story, we've followed a path paved with silence, pauses that should have been conversations, questions never asked, instincts ignored. But in the end, we're left with the hardest question of all. What really happened in that house? There are facts, yes. Blood traces, GPS logs, voicemails, witness statements, things we can measure. But beneath those, there are the things we feel, but can't prove. A look that didn't feel right, a breath that felt too heavy, a moment that passed too quietly. Was she scared? Yes, but of what? Of him? Of what he might have brought with him? Or something else entirely? She had waited 6 years to bring him home. She forgave things that others never would have. She held on through prison visits, missed holidays, and long-distance letters written under low light. And in return, all she wanted was the truth. A future. A version of him she believed could still exist. Instead, she got 4 days, and then silence. There are things we'll never know, not because they weren't seen, but because they weren't spoken. And maybe that's what hurts most. Because looking back now, the signs were there. They always are. The microwave, the unplugged lights, the way he stared instead of speaking, the spaces between what he did and what he said. But how many of us would have noticed? Would you? Would you have questioned the late night walks, the locked doors that hadn't been locked before, the small lies hidden in harmless smiles? Would you have said something, or would you have done what most of us do? Told yourself, he's just adjusting. It's probably nothing. Don't overthink it. Now ask yourself, what would you have done if it were you? If someone you loved came home different? Would you have believed your gut or ignored it? Would you have left or stayed? And if you stayed, would you still be here?